far as self-represented litigants, I would suggest that anyone who's going to a lawyer for any reason, any type of reason, they should make sure that they're as well prepared as possible, and their documentation is given to the lawyer, not just a shoebox of documents. You want to give them a nice organized binder with little tabs all the way along and an index, because ultimately, however much, you don't want them sifting through a shoebox. You want them reading your documents.
Right. So if you are organizing it for them, then they're going to save time and ultimately save you money.
Well, exactly. And the thing is, though, they're not going to have to put together a system to organize your documents. You know the documents better than anybody else.
Right.
So you should organize them. You should put them together. And the other thing too is making up a timeline, putting a table together, and as things go, because things are always going, things are always changing, things are always developing. Each time something develops, you add another row, and it makes it a lot easier as a reference to go back. And it just so happens that my timeline was so comprehensive that I looked at it and I was like, can't even summarize this. And I took the whole timeline and I put it into an affidavit as an exhibit. And I just said, here's a timeline. And there was no subjectiveness to it. And so I think everybody looked at it and said, well, yeah, this is exactly what happened. This is when I applied for this. This is when I spoke to this person. And it's a good resource too, because if you speak to someone, put their name in, put their phone number. If you've got their email, stick their email in it. And then it's going to make things a lot easier for you and for your lawyer.
Is what tips would you give other self-reps?
Be organized. Be really, really organized. Document everything. Get yourself a computer. When you've got your computer, have folders, subfolders. Save your files and save them in a sensible way. Try to keep your material just organized. It becomes it gets to the point where you're drowning in paperwork. And so if you're able to keep things organized, it shows. And especially when you start putting together affidavits with exhibits, you want to be able to find them and know where they are, especially if it happened like 12 or 18 months ago.
I'm just going to start from the top. You mentioned one tip is read as much about being a self-rep as possible. Can you go on a little bit about that?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, as far as reading, read as much as you can about being a self-rep. There's the resources that are online, but also if you go into CanLII, and you type in self-represented litigant or type in different variations, you can actually find cases that involve self-represented litigants. And for the most part, I think it's fair to say that there's some real nightmare stories. So read those nightmare stories and understand what they did wrong. Because if you can see what they've done wrong, and a lot of times they're being accused of all sorts of, awful things like vexatious litigant and everything else like that. So,
right.
But the thing is, though, read up and find out what other self-represented litigants have done wrong, and try to avoid doing that. So if you're applying for, in my case, an injunction, don't get distracted with anything else. Don't talk about the grass being not mowed or something else like that. Now, my neighbor kept a perfectly manicured lawn, but don't get distracted with stuff that have nothing to do with the don't get distracted with things that don't apply to your application. So don't get distracted. Try to focus on what's important. If you're applying for an injunction, don't discuss the state of someone's lawn or the state of someone's fence. Focus on what you want.
Yeah, another tip is download the court rules and understand them. Do you want to speak a little bit on that point?
Sure. In Saskatchewan, we have the Queen's Bench rules. Now, obviously in Ontario, you have some other rules. Now, I'm fortunate, I've got an iPad, so I download them on the iPad. I've got them open. I can scroll through them. I've got an iPencil, and I can highlight, I can put notations in. It's really important when you're submitting anything to the court, the timelines are really important. Unfortunately, any topic that you have, they don't keep it in one section. It's scattered throughout the whole rules.
Same here.
So you have to make sure, well, you have to know you have to read the whole thing.
Yeah.
For me, I was lucky, I was pretty happy about the size of the family law section. The family law section was quite significant, so I was able to skip that. And then estate rules, I was able to skip that.
Right.
So, but a lot of the things you go through, and the first time you read it, you don't notice it, but the second time, all of a sudden, you realize a lot of this stuff is very important, and there's no flexibility. You're either in compliance or you're not in compliance. And if you're not in compliance, I can guarantee you that the lawyer that you're facing is going to bring it to the attention of the court. So that's my rules. My suggestion is maybe you know this very well, because if you go before a judge who doesn't think that you're making an effort, even if you make a mistake, if you're not making an effort, you're going to get reprimanded.
That's a really good point. Now, moving on, you mentioned something about, so you use something called the Freedom of Information. Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, freedom of information.
In your case?
Yeah. So FOIP is awesome. It's an awesome resource for anybody. It's freedom of information, but it only applies to dealing with government agencies. So let's say you and I were neighbors, or something else like that. I couldn't submit a FOIP application on, I don't know, whatever it is. I'm just saying, you're not a government agency, so I can't apply for any information to do with a matter between the two of us.
Right.
But if the matter involved a municipal government, then all of a sudden I can make a FOIP application.
Right.
Now the government can also deny my application.
Right. And
then you can appeal that. So it just escalates and escalates. Now each FOIP application costs about $20, $25, $30 in Saskatchewan, and you have to wait 30 days. So it's just a matter of putting your FOIP application. Your question has to be very specific, and you submit it, and they send you a receipt, and then you wait patiently. And so I've submitted quite a few FOIP applications, and I was able to get those responses admitted as exhibits to show that I'd put in an effort to try to solve the puzzle. And based on the limited information I had, I was concerned about my property.
What suggestions would you give to self-reps when they're putting together an affidavit?
Keep it brief. I'm constantly impressed when a lawyer sends me an affidavit, and I read the affidavit and I look at it and I'm like, how did that lawyer manage to get all that information into 3 pages?
Yeah.
And I'm always impressed when I read, especially when they're being critical of me. I'm like, they managed to get this down to 3 pages.
Yeah.
I'm always impressed, and I'm envious. And so I'm always trying to keep it down. Sometimes the affidavit gets a little bit longer.
Yeah. Try
to keep it short and ask somebody to help you. Now, it just so happens that my mother is very helpful. She's very critical. And so a lot of times she'll send me feedback and she'll say, Douglas, you waffled on for too long. You mentioned something like 3 times, and she'll just strike out a whole page. And she's like, this is not useful. And to her credit, she's right. And so that's really helpful. The other thing too is if you're going to have a multi-page document, I remember not reading, but I saw a YouTube video with one of the judges who was commenting that it should be visually appealing.
Oh,
And I didn't understand what they meant,
yeah.
but they said, I was like, visually appealing? And what they meant, what they explained, and they said, I want to see the document and I want to see nice headings to say, and then keep it broken up, break the document up with nice headings. And when you look at some of the judgments from the court, you see that's how they write them. And so when you see how the judges write their judgments, you think, oh, well, that's how they develop their argument or their decision. He said, well, you can do the same thing, organized as possible, and then refer to your exhibits, and keep your exhibits ordered in an organized way. I like doing it in a chronological fashion. Make your affidavit as organized as possible.
Right.
Put in headings. Make sure that you've got headings in your document.
Yeah.
Make sure that you keep focused. And at the very end, it's helpful if you've got a lot of exhibits to put in a table, because you're going to be referring to the table quite a bit. So
Okay.
it's going to help you, and it's going to help the judge, and it's going to help the other party.